In part 1, we learned how Norwegian commando Jan Boelsrud escaped death many times over, while seeing comrades captured and killed in an ambush at Toftafjord in Arctic Norway, March of 1943. Hunted by 50 Nazis, he swam 3 freezing cold Arctic sounds, and severely wounded, he scampered over islands and mountains to avoid capture. But Mother Nature was to be his greatest rival, leaving him snowblind, severely injured, exhausted, delirious, and caught in an avalanche which he survived. Miraculously, he made it to Fugleflåten and the start of salvation. Marius Grönvall saved Jan Boelsrud's life. In a radio interview from the 1950s, Marius describes the actual events from 1943.
I grunnen var det ikke anledning å tenke så meget. Det valg jeg gjorde da var vel ganske naturlig. Enten måtte han ledes, eller så måtte han overleveres til tyskerne og den visse død. Han var jo en ung mann, ca. 25 år. Han var innhyllet i is og snø og en del blod. Hvert menneske som så han måtte få medlidenhet med han. Jeg og mine søstre, Gudrun, Hanna og Ingeborg, jeg gikk øyeblikkelig i gang med å skjære sko og strømper ut av de forfrosne bena, og med å pikke isen vekk imellom tærne. Tærne var nemlig sammenfrost til en stor isklump.
Jan had come down completely delirious through this valley in the Lingen Alps. In the bottom left foreground is the actual brook Jan thought he could hear, but not see. And this is the very field that Jan wandered around for 3 days or so. Completely delirious, he fell in the door of Hannah Petersen's house, who was the sister of Marius Grönvall. On my visit to Kjelløy, Marius' daughter, in Fugleflåten itself, I climbed Stortind at the back of the Grönvall farm. It's right beside that field. And halfway up the mountain, I could see directly across the bay, clear as day, to the other side. And I could spot this place, which was so important within the story. It was such an intricate part of the entire thing. You see, Fugleflåten itself was actually the main German garrison in Arctic Troms, and raids on houses were very, very common. So it was no surprise that the Grönvall farm was raided the very next day. A worried Marius hid Jan underneath the hay, burying him, and then extinguished the lantern and hid himself in the darkness as a soldier popped his head up into the attic of the barn. Marius now knew Jan was not safe here anymore. He had to be moved. So he got to work organising his transfer to Riavdal across the fjord to an old scorched farm on which a lonely hut stood at the bottom of the mountain that would finally take Jan to Finland and then Sweden. The thing is, to get Jan to Sweden was going to be a little bit of trouble. He wasn't going to be able to walk, his feet were too bad. So Marius had to come up with another plan, and he needed a sled, which he didn't have.
So this is where the resistance movement came into play again, and he enlisted the help of the local school caretaker. But it wasn't just as simple as making an ordinary sled. It had to be made to specific dimensions, no longer and no wider than one man could fit on. And it had to be made in pieces, like a jigsaw, that could slot together easily so that no suspicion would be aroused. No biggie, you might think. Well, the school caretaker worked at the school, the very building used by the Nazis as their accommodation and garrison. So there he was, working away on these pieces of the sled under the very noses of the Nazis, who just over a week previously had been searching for Jan back at Toftafjord. So lookouts at either end of the road gave signals as to when it was safe for Marius and his crew to actually move Jan. They had to walk along a little culvert just below and parallel to the German sentry, matching him pace for pace so as to conceal the noise of their footsteps.
The lookouts were actually Marius' sister and the local school headmaster, while Marius and Alvin Larsen lifted Jan over a fence, down the road, under a bridge, and into a boat that took him across the fjord to Riavdal and Hotel Savoy, the code name given to the little hut where they were to hide Jan. Here they gave Jan food, water, candles, and a knife.
Kan du legge inn en kniv?
Nei, Jan.
Doktoren kommer jo i morgen. Ikke hvis det blåser opp. Da kommer dere ikke over fjorden.
Nei, nå tuller han så fælt at nå går vi, Alfred. Du var jo blind når vi tok det over fjorden, så det kan du ikke.
Dere må legge igjen en kniv.
Hva skal du med kniv som har pistol?
Jeg har bare 7 skudd. Jeg trenger 9. Om du lover å vente til morgen. Jeg skal vente så lenge som jeg tør.
Even before they brought Jan over here to Riavdal, Marius had been busy doing other things, making arrangements with the people in Mandalen, the village on the other side of the mountain, to take over from the Fudaflotten crew to bring Jan to the Finnish frontier.
So their intentions were to return in a few days' time to check on Jan while they waited for the school caretaker to finish making the sled. Marius knew it wasn't going to be possible for Jan to do anything of his own accord from this point on. So it was time for him to get busy.
But a raging storm broke in the fjord for almost 2 weeks and prevented anyone from crossing. This made Marius feel absolutely helpless. Jan, meanwhile, was in absolute agony, rocking back and forth from searing pain in the feet here at the hut called Hotel Savoy. His feet were festering from infection, swelling and causing him unbearable agony. There was only one thing for it. He had to remove the infection the only way he thought possible.
So he took the schnapps bottle that he had and washed his hands, dousing them in alcohol to sterilise them. And then he took a knife, not too dissimilar to this baby. He also washed that in alcohol and then heated it over a candle flame to sterilise it. Once this was done, he made a very brave move. Took the knife and sliced through his now decaying and rotten frostbitten toes. One by one, bit by bit, over several days, with no painkillers, and just that knife. each time he had actually cut through and actually taken the fleshy bit of the toe away, he placed it on the shelf above him. Now you can only imagine the kind of pain that he went through before he started cutting the toes off. Actually the flesh from the toes off. But imagine what he went through psychologically to actually even attempt to put the knife near the flesh. And then imagine the pain he went through cutting the flesh off.
Once this was all over, Jan simply passed out, and then he slept for days. He had knocked over all of his food, the dried fish and water which Marius and the others had left for him. So he was already very weak, and when the storm settled, Marius and a few others made their way over to him.
When Marius and his crew eventually did arrive to check on Jan, they were welcomed by a devastating and disgusting smell and an unconscious Jan in the bed within the hut.
Martin, du store tid. Han spart meg for den jobben. Vi må forbinde han før vi drar.
Alvin Larsen was on his way to collect the sled from the school caretaker, and when he had gotten it and brought it back to Riavdal and Hotel Savoy, they'd assemble it on site and carry on up the mountain to meet the Mandolin crew. All of them were of course seasoned climbers and they had appropriate gear with them. But Alvin was delayed.
Der tar vakta og legger det gevær ifra seg, og sier til meg ikke hjelp. Nei, jeg takker han, det var fint, og igjen spratt det ned på baugen, det var ikke så høyt at det var noe problem. Og han skjuter da kassen foran ut og fikk tak i ned enda, og det var dog ikke tyngre at når han fikk en ende ned, så fikk det andre også. Og den ble da bare liksom slengt til sides imot rekkverket der, og så bare opp igjen på kajen. Jeg begynte liksom å ta i lommen etter tobakk og røyk. Hadde ikke tobakk selvfølgelig da. Da begynte han sigaretter som den vakta der. Og vi satt der på pullerten og pratet om løst og fast. Det kunne litt tysk. Så passet at man kunne føre en enkel samtale.
When I met with Shelloak, she told me everything and made it clear as to who did what, when and why.
Swiss watches don't fail. Men så alltså den här var efter Jan hade återhämtat sig och kom tillbaka hit och de hade nog kommit upp.
And it was fascinating to listen to her. But here's Marius Grönvall, her father, talking about the climb itself, in his own words, on a radio interview from the 1950s.
Ja, det var natt til den 25. april, cirka klokken 12, at vi kom derover. Vi har 4 mann. Bolster ble såret fast på en medbrakt skikjelke. Og vi startet på klatringen. Det viste snart at det var umulig å dra kjelken opp på vanlig måte. Vi hadde med oss en dragline på cirka 20 meter. Transporten måtte da med en gang organiseres slik at 2 av karene gikk først, lina ut altså, og halte på kjelken, mens de 2 andre gikk på hver side og forsøkte å holde kjelken på rett kjøl. Vi fortsatte på det vis opp gjennom skogen. Det viste snart at terrenget her var uhyre vanskelig. Den verste hindringen vi hadde var småbjørk. Vel, vi kom da til bunnen av kløften og fortsatte videre opp. Også her inntraff en ganske dramatisk situasjon i det at vi som dro på kjelken glidde et øyeblikk og røst nedover. Han som gick bak, Amandus Lillevold, hade emellertid förstått situationens allvar och slog sig fast i snön för ett ögonblick och låt kälken törna mot bröstet. Det kostade han brist i par ribbein, men situationen var rädd. Det var cirka 60 meter ner till begynnelsen av luften. Och den eneste utväg vi hade då var att försöka komma oss dit ner för att fortsätta vidare upp därifrån. Det visade snart att transporten längs den bratta skråningen var uhyre vanskelig. I det snön var här så hard att det var omöjligt att få fotfäste. Vi måste höja hack i snön för att komma oss vidare. Drejarmännen gick på nödsidan och höll den ene meja upp medan den andra glidde efter snön.
There was one final pitch to overcome, and it was a hell of a pitch. One which Jan Bolster awoke while dangling 3,000 foot above Furuflaten over the edge of a mountain. Absolutely terrified, he passed out again.
Vi fortsatte vidare upp och kom på toppen av Platå cirka klockan 10 på förmiddag. Vädret hade hela tiden varit ganska gunstig.
Där strök ett tysk fly över, en junker. Och när vi då högte flyget så kastade vi oss bara ner som stenar visst och här. Och flyget fortsatte över, den gick nog så lavt men den uppdagade inte oss. Och då fortsatte vi vidare och när vi då kom till mötesstedet, där var ingen där. Det var då vi fann på att vi ska mura in i en sån, det var en naturlig snöhule skapt av en sten.
Vær så snill, Martin. Få hjem av munn før det blir svart i natta.
Ja, ja. De andre.
Och vi blev då eniga med Bolsjud och vi snackade ju sammen att vi må lämna det här.
Just before he left, Mario said something to Jan which he, at the time, didn't think about, but then afterwards felt was quite bizarre.
Er det noe mer jeg kan gjøre for deg?
But you see, Jan was more or less just grateful to be alive after the climb and really didn't mind.
As Marius was leaving, he asked Jan to give the password for the Mandalen men, and Jan responded perfectly.
Glem ikke passordet, Jan.
Hallo, gentleman.
Hallo, gentleman.
But back in Mandalen, the Germans had actually arrived and started conducting house-to-house searches. Now they were obviously looking for Jan, but they found nothing. The thing is, this prevented any of the Mandalen crew from making the climb up to meet the Furuflaten crew. So Marius and the others just had to leave Jan and head back down, otherwise they would have been caught.
Up on the plain where Jan was hiding, he could hear voices, and at first he thought they were Norwegian, but then as they got closer, he heard they were German. Thankfully they missed Jan completely, and he escaped with his life, yet again.
To add to the whole confoundment and bizarre situation, the weather was absolutely diabolical, and they couldn't make the climb. But 5 days later, it all changed, and despite the presence of the Germans still, the Mandalen crew made their way up the mountain. But the problem was they found nothing, and the weather got worse still.
Sadly, Jan was now buried under 2 meters of snow, making it impossible for him to be found, and absolutely impossible for him to hear any shouts of "Hello, a gentleman" above him.
Vi kom då till Revdalen, men det var inte någon slags tegn till spår efter folk. Och ingen mörska, så vi gick från sten till sten, men vi fann ingenting där.
So once more Marius had to make a climb up the mountain of Revdal to check on a man he thought he had left to die alone on the wastelands of Guadalajara. He was literally out of his mind with worry and couldn't think of anything else to do. Not only that, he was a little bit like Jan. He couldn't just give up, especially after all of the efforts that were made to get him this far. This time though, Marius' future wife Agnieszka would make the climb with him in the dead of night. It was a little more difficult than the first climb this time around because there was fresh snow on the ground. And Marius was also worried about Agnieszka, who wasn't as good a climber as him. They still made it to the top though.
At the summit, they dug down to find Jan. But this took time. They didn't expect to find him alive. Slowly Marius dug a hole out with his hand to find a corpse like Jan, silent and still at first. And then...
Han død.
Nei. Du lurer ikke en gammel rev?
Jan!
Absolutely elated, they got to work reviving Jan, giving him new food and soup and some water before placing a new marker out for the Mandalen crew. Once this was done, they made their way back down to Fugleflåten. This return trip nearly killed Agnieszka, but Marius, he had to get really rough and force Agnieszka down the mountain, back to Fugleflåten before they were missed. As soon as Marius and Agnieszka got back down the mountain to Reapdal and across the bay to Fugleflåten, they sent word over to the Mandalen crew that Jan was alive and they had to go up and get him.
Så fick vi besked om att handeln med nota var gått i orden. Den kan hämtas. Och då skönte vi vad det var och att det blev brukt som stickord, det var ju vant. Och Egon Nilsson var klar igen och startade upp. Strax det blev kväll så startade vi upp till Revdalen. Och då såg vi ganska långt att det var satt av 2 skistavar med toppan i sand av en sten. Då var det ju ganska krätt för oss och lätt att gå och tälla. Vi började att grava med en gång händelsnövad omkring stengren.
When Peter and his friends got no answer, they thought that this man was definitely dead. And they were giving up hope. But still something egged them on to continue digging deeper, and they kept calling out, "Hello, gentlemen." They did find him eventually, and several attempts to take him to Sweden by ski on the sled failed time and time again, either from sheer exhaustion, lack of time, or bad weather.
Men vi puttade han så ner i posen igen och batt han på kälken och då bar det av gårde mot gränsen. 4 man med tau och kälken med ett dyrebar last. Ja, vi hade så gått i en 3-4 timmar. Nordvästen hade börjat ta sig upp igen med snöbyga och några vindjog. Men vi hade i ryggen så det gick ganska fint likaväl. Men det tättnade så till att vi såg nästan ingenting mer. För upp i 1000 meters höjd i kuling och slyfock, det är inte så väldigt rätt. Så vi gick med stöcken och så blev vi eniga då att vi måste stoppa upp och få landkänning och vi kom. Så vi låta kälken bli igen och gick ett bra stycke framåt för att få känning ner mot Mandal hur långt vi kom.
And they thought a better plan is needed. The circumstances were also changing. The amount of darkness that they had was now dissipating, and 24 hours of daylight was starting to come, as was the norm at that time of year up in Arctic Troms. They had to enlist the help of other people, and they thought they knew just who to contact. Someone who could travel between all of the Scandinavian countries with sheer freedom. People who knew no borders, no countries, no nations. They were their own people. The thing is, they couldn't leave Jan up in Guadalsfara any longer. The open plains were definitely going to kill him. And not only that, it was too much work and too dangerous for the lads, Sverre, Peder and all the others, to be travelling up and down the mountain along Sherringdal to collect Jan every time. So they thought, we'll move him. We'll bring him to a cave a little bit further down that we know is quite safe. And from here, people can reach him easier and tend to him with food and so on, until the Sami actually arrive.
In 1987, Jan was brought back to the same cave and met some of those people that visited him fed him, and changed his soiled clothing during his incapacitation at the cave in 1943. One of the locals even fixed his saltwater damaged Colt 25 pistol during this time. And while he was laid up here, they waited for the Sami reindeer herders to come and collect Jan to take him to Sweden.
Så skulle vi alltid la dem få mat och drycke och logi om det är nödvändigt.
But weeks went by and no one came to collect Jan. And then all of a sudden, word came that a group of Sami were on their way. So the Mandal crew mobilised very quickly to move Jan back up to the plains of Gualasfara. But there were several Sami families asked to help, and they weren't sure which one of them it was that was coming. And the thing about the Sami is they're a nomadic folk. They have no concept of borders, countries, or even war. It doesn't matter to them. They live their lives by the course of the reindeer trails, and wherever the reindeer went, they went. So Jan was left to wait yet another week, but no Sami reindeer herder came. Each day, someone from Mandalen came up to visit him. But at this stage it was getting desperate. And the thoughts were that Jan wasn't going to live much longer. I mean, how could he? He was so gaunt as it was. He was so small. He was so thin. Every time they went up to visit him, the Mandalen folk expected to find Jan Bulsrud dead. But they didn't. He was still alive every single time.
On one particular day, Jan did begin to lose hope, and images of his comrades came flooding back. He couldn't bear it any longer and thought it best to end this torture. But the faces of all those people that had helped him came flooding back as well. So he had to stay alive. He had to be able to thank them. Otherwise, all their efforts would have been a waste.
But just then, out of nowhere, this Sami man appeared above him. And both he and Jan stared at each other in complete silence for what seemed like an eternity. Jan wasn't sure if he was real or an hallucination. That was until this Sami's brother joined him to lift Jan out of the hole on the sled. And they placed him in amongst all of the reindeer and left him there.
Han var nog ganska sjuk och jag har nog hört han sa han har vägt bara 35 kilo. Men han var ju kort packad in. Man såg inte så mycket av kroppen, bara ansikte. Men ansikte var skitten och skäggar. Det var bara ögon igen och lite näsa. Det hade han. Men humöret var inte så värst. Han brödde nog och smilade lite. Visst man ser dusker och sånt. Det var ett mycket farligt jobb. Det ska jag säga. Jag var nog lite beväpnad jag också lite. Jag hade gevär med mig.
So the two Sami brothers placed Jan on a new sled in amongst all of the reindeer, which Jan wasn't sure were going to hurt him or not. But to be honest, he was more worried about the fact that for 2 days, the Sami brothers were within in their teepee, getting very, very jovial on all of the schnapps that were used to pay for his transportation to Sweden. All Jan could hear was yoiking, traditional Sami singing, within in the teepee, and lots of smoke coming out of the top. And then one of the brothers came out one night, I think it was the second night according to the story, and offered him some schnapps. Jan wasn't sure what the guy was up to at first.
Eventually the Ball brothers had their fill of yoiking and schnapps, and then they decided to make their way to Finland. But first they dressed Jan up as a Sami to make the journey.
Crossing into and passing through Finland went quite smooth until they got to the Finnish-Swedish border. Here there was a German outpost, but the guards weren't great skiers and they were a little bit lackadaisy. The thing is though, they still had to cross a bridge over a river between Finland into Sweden, and supposedly the Germans gave chase at this bridge. Jan was actually convinced that the Germans gave chase and shot at them, but the two Sami brothers have always denied this and there was no proof. Still though, they actually forced the reindeer to scamper faster across the bridge into Sweden itself, and then they made their way up along the river to another Sami home. Right, so they'd made it to Sweden, but the job wasn't done yet. And this is where the two Sami brothers exited the story. So the two brothers brought Jan to Aslak Juuso's home in Komavopio, Sweden. Here, Aslak and his family had previously helped other Allied soldiers escape from Sweden back to the UK. So they made arrangements to take Jan along the river up to a place called Sarakoski and an estuary where a seaplane would be waiting to take Jan to a hospital. The only thing is, this river was full of ice floes, big massive chunks of ice, clumps of ice that were in the middle of a river with a strong current, and they kept smashing together, packing. That made it nearly impossible for the seaplane to land and take off. Less than ideal situation for a man who had been waiting over 2 months for freedom. The trip along this river in this very small boat terrified Jan. He wasn't sure he was ever going to get away. He wasn't sure he was going to survive this trip. And after all he had been through, that would be a tragedy. But he was very impressed by the man who handled the boat on the river.
Fordi jeg lå jo nede I en pose, ikke sant, og kunne ikke røre meg. Men jeg var veldig imponert over den mannen foran og bak, som stod med stakker for å unngå vanskeligheter.
When they arrived at the estuary here at Sarakoski, the men worked frantically to clear a path through all of the ice floes, so a seaplane from the Red Cross could come in and land. Flying the plane was a very skillful Swedish pilot by the name of Norberg, and he turned the plane around very quickly while the men in the boat loaded Jan Bulstrud on board and once more began clearing a path through the ice floes to make ready for takeoff. This was a very dangerous job, and big chunks of ice kept coming in and packing and smashing together in the middle of the river, and every time a path was cleared for takeoff, it closed up just as quickly. But Norberg had no choice. He had to start his takeoff run. And as he picked up speed, the men on the river worked manically to clear a path, and just at the last second a huge chunk of ice came right into the middle of Norberg's takeoff. But the skillful aviator that he was, he rotated, putting the plane on full power, lifting off and missing the ice by an inch as they got airborne. Jan Bulstrud was now finally on his way to freedom. Despite everything that the Germans and Mother Nature could throw at him, and at the very verge of losing it all at the end, Norwegian Commando Second Lieutenant Jan Bulstrud had proved that he had more than 9 lives and refused to give in, despite everything. Miraculously, he was alive to tell the tale of this incredible, incredible journey. At the hospital, Jan gave a report on Operation Martin as best he could. Then he spent 6 months recovering in Garderhund Hospital, Boden, Sweden. Later he flew back to Scotland by Mosquito aeroplane.
Mosquito, 2-motors Mosquito. Bombejager, kan du kalle den. Det raskeste flyet vi hadde på den tiden. Og det brukte akkurat 2 timer fra Bromma til vi landet i Skottland.
And there he took up a role as marksmanship chief instructor for Kompani Linge. He later returned to Norway as an SOE agent and took control of Russian prison camps in the Bergen area, which the Germans handed over to the Allies. A short while later, on inspection, he met King Harald VII
of Norway. He was awarded the St. Olav Medal with oak leaf in recognition of outstanding service rendered for overseas service for Norway's benefit. The oak leaf is only awarded in wartime and ranks 6th in the order of precedence of Norwegian medals. He was also awarded an MBE for his work during the war. After the war, Jan left Kompani Linge and the Norwegian Defence Forces in September of 1945. In 1947 he became a founding member of the Linge Club, of which he became its first president, a position which he held for many, many years. He was the first honorary member of the Norwegian War Invalid Confederation. It's a mouthful. He also held the position of that organisation as president for 8 years, after which he then became the vice president of the World Federation of War Veterans, and he held that position for 6 years. After the war, Jan did his best to move on with his life, and he tried to forget everything that happened during those 2 months in 1943.
Hele historien glemte jo jeg i 1945, eller jeg forsøkte å glemme den så godt som mulig, og den var jo helt borte da David Howard kom og ville at jeg skulle bli med til Nord-Norge.
Truth be told, we may never have found out about this story had it not been for a particular man. A Royal Navy volunteer reserve officer by the name of Lieutenant Commander David Howard found Jan's report amongst a bunch of archives in the War Office. Howard had run the Shetlands bus, which was the operation that Jan was originally part of through the Linge Company. Together with Jan, David Howard went back to Arctic Norway and retraced the story and wrote a book. The book was also made into an Oscar-nominated film, Ni Liv, in 1957, which Jan Bolsrud himself was actually a producer on, and he made sure he was there for the entire shoot from start to finish. He also went back and climbed Rivdal again, this time of his own accord, with the 4 men, the same 4 men that brought him up this peak in 1943. Later on in life, Jan moved to Tenerife to live his life out due to his injuries, which couldn't tolerate the cold very well. Together with his second wife and daughter from his first marriage, they had an orange farm, and later he became a pig farmer, just like Sigurd Eskeland had been in Argentina before the war. Sadly, Jan became very ill during the 1980s, as if it wasn't enough to be suffering with all of the pain that he had in his feet from his injuries in the Arctic. He became severely ill with cancer and spent the last 4 months of his life at the veterans' home he set up in Bergen, in Kongsvinger, Norway. Here they took care of him until he died on December 30th, 1987. In 1989, a simple gravestone was erected in Jan's memory at the village of Mandalen. His last wish is to be buried here together with Aslak Fossvold. A simple but fitting tribute to an incredible story and an incredible bunch of people. After the war, Marius married Agneta and they had 5 children. And he went into business with Alvin Larsen and had a great post-war life. This whole story is absolutely incredible, but it's 100% true. And the people of the time demonstrated something which the world today is very much lacking. It's a story of hope and courage, as well as defiance in the face of extreme adversity. But it's so much more than that. It's about indomitable spirit. The refusal to give in no matter what,
Even when everything seems lost and there doesn't seem to be any hope, if you have the will to keep going, you will survive and you will come out the other side victorious. But I think it's best to give Jan Bulstrud himself the last word on his incredible true story. Thank you for watching.
Ja, jeg vil blant annet si at den må jo ha den misjonen at det viser at man skal ikke gi.